Astra nuts? Do you feel unworthy of love due to your size? Do you want to get that BBL body without the surgery? Well, do I have the perfect workout for you. It's designed to target fat-phobia and bias in scientific research that leads to discrimination in medicine. So, put on your sweatbands and get ready for a heavy discussion involving the following triggers: diets, fat-phobia, anti-fat discrimination, medical malpractice and discrimination, racism, anti-Semitism, and EDs. Please feel free to skip this workout if any of those topics will jeopardize your health. And let's be clear, this isn't a body positivity or activism video. It's about bias in science using a pretty topical subject with all the benefits of a jazzercise workout. Welcome to Bad Astra. Start with some cycling and historical context. If you don't have a stationary bike at home, you're welcome to jog or walk in place. What's most important is that you're moving and grooving. But if you can't move and groove, just sit back and relax. I'm just a fitness instructor on a screen. I can't make you do anything. Historical context is very much a humanities topic. So I worked out my brain by reading Dr. Sabrina String's book, Fearing the Black Body. We're going to crunch this down into a video script, but I highly recommend reading her book if you want a more in-depth look into the historical context. So let's cycle back to the 1600s. This is where the thin ideal started for wealthy white men in Britain and France. Being thin meant you were disciplined and focused and feeding your brain instead of your body. So if you were thin, you were considered morally, spiritually, and intellectually superior. This belief came from Christian ideologies and was more extreme in groups like the Puritans, because temperance is key to salvation and all about endangering your health for a magic man in the clouds. It's time to hop off your bikes and do some Puritan step-ups. You're going to start on your knees with your hands pressed together like you're praying to God. Now, you're going to step up, hands still pressed together in prayer, and keep your torso straight. You're going to jump up towards heaven, and then bring your hands back together in prayer and get right back down on your knees to pray to Jesus. Now, do the other side, and let's do a few reps. And 1. Keep that pace up and that heart pumping. We want to show God how ready we are to sacrifice for salvation. Do as many reps as you can until your thighs are burning, and God has blessed you with a thin body to show everyone how devoted you are to Jesus. My thighs are definitely starting to feel the burn. God, am I doing enough? Are you going to make me skinny yet? Nietzsche, how about you? Anyone? Now that we've been abandoned by God, let's get back to cycling. This time in the 1700s. We're going to follow the diet suggested by doctor turned spiritual leader George Shaney, formerly known as Glenn Shamblin. He started the first big medical campaign against overconsumption. Shaney said to avoid coffeehouse diets that are high in sugar, alcohol, caffeine, and red meat. Instead, try a more vegetarian diet of milk, fruit, and seeds to lose those extra pounds. Shaney attracted a lot of women to this spiritual weight loss cult, which included this vegetarian diet as well as a healthy amount of fasting and purging, which are two major symptoms of EDs, but God will love you more. The ideal of thinness really took off when it combined with the very popular race science. Comte de Buffon was a prominent race scientist that took the association between thinness and intellect and combined it with racism to argue that Africans were stupid and inferior due to their fatness, except the thin ones because they were basically white at that point. Did he ever meet anyone from Africa or visit the continent to study the people he was making broad, horribly unscientific, racist generalizations about? Nope. But nor did the wealthy white people who loved pseudoscience that reaffirmed their right to dehumanize an entire race of people. But Astra, how racist was it? Let me quote Dr. Strangles, the expert on this topic. Indulging in food, once deemed by philosophers to be a lowbrow predilection of slow-witted persons, became evidence of actual low breeding. It bespoke an inborn, race-specific propensity for laziness and ease, an unbridled desire to meet the demands of the flesh at the expense of cultivating higher pursuits. Such behavior was deemed wholly uncharacteristic of the rational thinkers sitting atop the new racial hierarchy. So, super racist. Hop off those bikes and let's get ready for our next exercise. This one is called the reach and tie. We're going to start with a quick grapevine over to our left. Then we're going to reach up and grab that concept of thinness. Grapevine back over the right, reach up and grab that concept of white supremacy. Now we're going to tie them together and repeat. We're going to keep doing this until society unties them, which will definitely bring us to the modern era since we still haven't unlearned racism or fat-phobia, despite many people thinking otherwise. And while we're at it, let's reach and tie aesthetics with morality, just like English philosophers, moralists, race scientists, and fashion magazines did all the way into the 1800s. Remember, gluttony is a sin and you're inferior if you're fat. Are we going to leave the religious propaganda in favor of some scientific evidence? No. Are we going to return to cycling? You betcha. Fat, presumed to be the product of immoral and irrational intemperance, was considered lowbrow. In women, it was also comically unattractive. Sylvester Graham, the cracker guy, and the most popular diet priest of the 1830s, also said that diets high in tea, coffee, spices, and meat provoked a ravenous, unchristian sexual appetite in men. A Presbyterian minister and temperance advocate from the early 1800s stating things as fact with no scientific method or evidence to back it up? Shocking! Now, most of these movements were led by men, but the main consumers were women. Women were at the sermons, reading the writing, and consuming the fashion and beauty magazines that pushed this skinny ideal. So it's no wonder that the modern beauty and diet industries are still targeting mostly women. The need for spiritual superiority represented by thinness and whiteness created an easy justification for slavery and discrimination against immigrants. However, white is a fluid racial category with a wildly changing definition that does not include everyone with white skin, which is sort of how we think of whiteness today. Celtic Irish people immigrating to America in large numbers in the early 1800s? Not white. Why? Because they weren't pure Anglo-Saxons that were traditionally tall and lean. Irish women were stereotyped as short, irredeemably greedy, and fat. Writers of the time justified this as Celtic Irish people being part African or part Asian or part Semitic, depending on what group of people deemed undesirable you wanted to choose. Godey's Ladies' Book, the most widely circulated magazine before the Civil War, published loads of fatphobic racist nonsense, including an 1855 piece called The Fat Widow, which describes the horrifying fear of an interracial marriage between a Scotsman and an Irish woman. Because Scotland and Ireland were home to two completely different races. Luckily for the Irish, the definition of white shifted to include more Northern Europeans, or Nordics, sometimes called Aryans, between the 1880s and 1920s. The new non-white groups were hybrid races, now part African and Asian and originating from Southern and Eastern Europe, who were vilified as fat once again. Funny how the Irish became white and thin, right as their immigration to the US slowed, and the new wave of immigrants at the time were from southern Italy and Jewish people fleeing the Russian Empire. As a reminder, the fatphobic rhetoric targeting groups who would later become white were based on fatphobic stereotypes about black people, who were universally vilified and never included in the conversation. Now we're going to do the exercise searching for science. You're going to want to start with your feet a bit further than shoulder width apart. Squat down, be sure to keep your back straight and your knees over your ankles. Now, we're going to come up on our right, looking for any scientific evidence to support these fat-phobic and racist theories of the 1700s. I don't see any, so squat back down and look to your left to see if there's any scientific evidence to support these theories in the 1710s. Still not there, so we're going to keep squatting and looking through the decades. Repeat this exercise until you get to the first academic paper published in the 1920s. But is there any science in this one? Not really. Pop quiz. At the beginning of the 20th century, connections between race, weight, and beauty entered reputable academic articles and mainstream newspapers through A, vigorous scientific testing that was peer-reviewed multiple times, B, consensus data collected from a large stratified sample that represented the demographics at the time, or C, eugenics. You know, Nazi shit. If you chose C, you're correct. As a friendly recap, everything we've covered started with religion equating thinness to being spiritually superior, moved through fashion magazines connecting thinness and beauty, all with the undercurrent of whiteness being connected to thinness to further a white supremacist agenda. And now, after however many minutes into the video we are, 300 years in history and 3 workouts later, we're getting to the science. And that science is eugenics. Let's return to Dr. Strange's writing. The anxiety surrounding the possibility that the dreaded new immigrants were not only living among but potentially interbreeding with the Nordic population was in evidence at the highest levels of journalistic and academic authorship. In an article that would be reprinted in a number of newspapers, including the New York Times, Harvard professor and esteemed race scientist William Z. Ripley declared, "The Anglo-Saxon race is threatened with complete submergence by those believed to be physically and mentally degenerate." He feared that Jews in particular were outliving and outbreeding Anglo-Saxons, and thus threatening the future of the nation. Yeah, if they're outliving and outbreeding you, maybe you're not the master race, whatever that means, but okay. Dr. John Harvey Kellogg, the cereal guy and another diet priest, actually wanted women to be less thin to preserve the superior Anglo-Saxon race. Kellogg was a physician, eugenicist, and ardent Christian who worked to bring medicine into the weight discussion because frail, underweight women were a threat to the master race. Really makes you look differently at Tony the Tiger and Toucan Sam. Kellogg's ideas were mainstream, and he published 11 articles in the Journal of the American Medical Association between the 1880s and the 1920s. This was at a time when the American Medical Association was still really new, having only formed in 1847 and not even claiming to represent the majority of doctors until around 1920. And many doctors in the 20s were excited to help their patients get thinner, prescribing thyroid medications to healthy people so they lose weight. Let's also remember that this was during a time where cocaine was still used in medicine. At the same time as organized medicine was becoming a thing, weight became quantifiable. At-home scales, the first way to frequently quantify weight, became a thing around 1913, long after anti-fat societal attitudes had solidified. This is when medical science could do studies. And by medical science, I mean health insurance companies. This included studies that asked policyholders, aka salaried employees who were almost exclusively white men, about their size. In 1912, hundreds of thousands of policyholders from multiple companies had their weights and ages collected to be studied by a statistician. The conclusion was that being overweight was good for people under 35 and could lead to illness for people over 35. These weights were all self-reported, and at-home scales, again, became a thing in 1913, about a year after the study was published. That didn't stop the study from blowing up. Well, half the study. Overweight is good for people under 35 was completely ignored for some strange and completely legitimate reason. Let's take a look at some more reputable medical studies from the time. We're going to speed through these, so make sure to step your cycling or jogging up. 1800s, Belgian mathematician and astronomer Lambert Adolphe Jacques Quetelet creates a formula to measure obesity that would later become the body mass index. It was based on the assumption average people were fairly sedentary and therefore had low muscle mass and high relative fat content, which weighs less than muscle. He also founded the racist skull pseudoscience, phrenology. Also not a medical doctor. Remember, mathematician and astronomer, not a physician. 1924, Dr. Elliot Jocelyn, a very respected doctor at the time, wrote, "The Jew, in my opinion, is not prone to diabetes because he is a Jew, but rather because he is fat. Jews are fat, though shameful to relate." What was the data to support the relationship between fatness, disease, and race, and prove this is not just some anti-Semitic assertion based on a harmful stereotype? There are a few statistics of the comparative weights of even 1,000 Gentiles and 1,000 Jews. His words, "Oh, to be a white male scientist in the 1900s whose opinion is treated as the gospel truth." 1937. The body weight table, developed in 1912, gets an updated set of normal weights and includes self-reported body frame sizes of middle-class white guys. They were not given any context and were asked, "Would you consider yourself small, medium, or large?" And if we know anything about white men, it's that they'll tell you that this is large. 1958. Ancel Keys and the 7 countries study. He used data from 7 different countries to find the link between diet, weight, and coronary heart disease. What did they find? Weight and mortality have a U-shaped correlation, with extremely skinny people and extremely heavy people being at the greatest risk. Being overweight correlated to chest pain, but not heart attacks or coronary death. Keys admitted this in the 1961 Times article, claiming that obesity didn't cause coronary disease, but was ugly. Other phrases he used to describe fat people in his studies included disgusting, repugnant, clumsy, and hard on furniture. He wasn't the only one describing fat people this way in scientific publications. But sure, scientists can't be biased. 1985. Keys loved the Quetelet index from the racist skull mathematician so much, he brought it back and renamed it the body mass index. So, the National Institute of Health abandoned the insurance company weight table from 1937 in favor of the racist skull guy's formula from 100 years earlier as a valid weight-based criteria because it pretty much matched MetLife's 1983 tables for acceptable weights. But hey, at least this less accurate method of measuring health is faster for doctors to use and saves money. Thanks, racist skull guy! 1980s and 1990s in general. Non-white people start being studied, finally. The Department of Health and Human Services found that a disproportionate amount of illness and death is experienced by Black and other minority communities. Was it due to cycles of poverty, lack of equal access to medical care, environmental racism allowing for toxic waste to be dumped in Black and brown communities, or systematic oppression? No! Personal responsibility was labeled the answer to reducing the gap between mortality in white people and people of color. This was a real proposed solution in a real report published by a government agency in 1990. It's called Healthy People 2000. It also said, and I quote, "You, the individual, can do more for your own health and well-being than any doctor, any hospital, and drug." You know, like an anti-vaxxer would say. Looks like our speedy cycling through medical study history not only gave us a good cardio workout, but also cured every disease we could have better than any doctor can. If we can do more than hospitals and drugs, then we can stop taking any and all medicine and cancel our health insurance. Let me translate what the conclusion of that report actually means. Actually addressing the root of systemic issues that historically oppressed people face would require fundamentally changing society. But that's hard, so I'd rather victim blame. This is like telling somebody with depression that they just need to think more positively about their life. Or that better budgeting is the way to get out of poverty. No, Karen, You can't pull yourself up by the bootstraps. That's literally the point of the phrase. Wow, trying to defy physics is another great workout. I could do this for the rest of my life and still see no improvement in my situation. But Astra, what about the obesity epidemic in the United States? That has to be real and not a result of the racial biases of scientists. Well, we use BMI to calculate if someone is considered obese, which again is a formula from the 1800s created by a racist skull guy that was updated in the 1900s to better fit a white man's aesthetic. It does not take into account the scholarly articles that show that black people in America tend to have higher bone density and muscle mass, which would lead to higher BMIs. It does not take into account that hyperfit athletes with 5% body fat and high muscle density would be considered obese according to just BMI. And it certainly does not take into account the 2003 study, Years of Life Lost Due to Obesity, which found that while the ideal BMI for white people is 23 to 25, it can be up to 32 for black men and 37 for black women. What's considered the healthy BMI? 18.5 to 25. Who gets singled out by medical studies for having higher obesity rates? Black women. Some scholars started to suspect that BMI, a ratio that was created by a racist skull science guy who wasn't a medical doctor, has a racial bias and might not be a good indicator of health. Shocking, I know! Did you also hear that water might be wet? 2013, a tale of two studies. A recent PhD recipient named Ryan Masters, who had a few obesity studies under his belt, wrote, "The impact of obesity on US mortality levels, the importance of age and cohort factors in population estimates." The sample size was 718,000 American adults and found that 18% of adult deaths from 1986 to 2006 were caused by obesity. The racial breakdown was 5% for black men, 15.6% for white men, 21.7% for white women, and 26.8% for black women. The study also excluded all people reporting BMIs lower than 18.5, remember, the bottom end of that healthy range, assuming that the low weight was caused by a pre-existing illness, even though, in their methods, they assumed that obesity was the cause of illness. By the way, there are many illnesses that result in weight gain. And they also, in this study, assume that correlation equals causation. Their methods were literally overweight people correlated with more deaths, therefore overweight causes the death. That was it. That was their methods. They didn't control for race, they didn't control for income, they didn't control for background, they didn't control for neighborhood, zip code, any of those things. The study also went against most existing research, finding that obesity's effect on mortality grew with age. The second study was by Catherine Flegel, MD, one of the most cited obesity researchers in the world. She wrote, "Association of all-cause mortality with overweight and obesity using standard body mass index categories," which was a meta-analysis of 97 studies from 1997 to 2012. The international sample size was 2.88 million people and 270,000 deaths. It found that overweight people with a BMI of 25 to 30 were actually at a 6% lower risk of death than those in the normal range of 18.5 to 25. Obese people in the 30 to 34.9 range were found to have the same death risk that normal BMIs have. So, pop quiz time again. Which scientist was seen as the unquestionable authority, gaining a lot of attention from news outlets? Was it the recent graduate with a smaller sample size, or the world-renowned expert on obesity with a large international sample size? If you chose the recent graduate, Dr. Ryan Masters, you'd be correct. Dr. Catherine Flegel's paper, on the other hand, incited a conference with over 200 attendees to explain why Her study's conclusions were absolutely wrong. Now it's time for my favorite exercise, confirmation bias stretches. You're gonna start with your feet a bit more than shoulder width apart. Then you're gonna reach up and to your left, grabbing at that conclusion you want while ignoring a whole bunch of data points based on hypocritical assumptions. Yeah, that feels good. Now, do the same thing over on your right, reaching for that narrative you want while ignoring a whole bunch of evidence that says you're wrong about the link between obesity and mortality rates. Oh yeah. Keep doing this until you get the answer you want, not necessarily the correct one. You should feel a good stretch in your sides and in your study's conclusions. You all are doing great. Towel off and take a well-deserved break, specifically an expert break. Please welcome registered dietitian and fellow YouTuber, Benson, who I have the pleasure of sitting down and chatting with. I'm a physicist citing a historian, and I've made the case for bias and for questioning any scientific studies with that anti-fat bias, but I haven't actually disproved any science. Because to do that, I'd need to bring on an expert with formal training. With that in mind, let's talk to registered dietitian and fellow YouTuber, dietitian Benson.
Hello.
Is obesity correlated with mortality and negative health outcomes, or is that just bias?
Part of that is yes, part of that is no. When I'm talking about, let's say, the health at every size movement, I will always get the comments, well, you can't be healthy at every size. Like, what if you can't move, or what if you can't get up or do anything like that? Or they'll say also on the flip side, like, what if you don't have anything on you and you're just, very, very at a low weight? And to that, I say, like, well, okay, no shit, Sherlock. There are going to be those outliers. There is going to be that range. That is not what health at every size means, though. There is, though, a variety that we can have in body sizes and have health along with that variety in body sizes. We know that, yes, at the very end wide range, we can have some health issues. But we also know that we don't have to have as much of a narrow goal frame to have health. We can see people in the BMI overweight range, or even a little bit higher too, have really healthy blood glucose levels, cholesterol levels, high blood pressure levels. At the same time, when we're focused so much on those people at a higher weights and pathologizing them and their health, we miss the opportunity for a lot of healthy weight people, in quotes, that sometimes end up having diabetes, type 2 diabetes, hypertension, high cholesterol issues, and not knowing it until further along down when they could have learned about it earlier, but because they were at that, again, quote, healthy weight, that wasn't something that was really a concern. And so there is so much focus on the numbers of people with type 2 diabetes, cholesterol, hypertension, all of those metabolic issues at that higher weight, but that can also happen at people at a, quote, again, healthy weight as well.
So the stigma and stereotypes surrounding weight affect everybody negatively, not just heavier
Right.
people. They also affect thin or straight-sized people as well.
Yeah, I like the way you mentioned that. It very much does.
I have read a couple studies that suggest that medical discrimination, encouraging dieting, and therefore usually weight cycling, and just the social stigma surrounding being fat could actually be worse for someone's health than the weight in general. So I guess my question is, even if
we say that weight is a health factor and weight causes issues, which the science is not back on. Could it be that the stigma is worse than the weight, even if we say that the weight is bad, which again, we are not?
Absolutely. So this goes all the way back to the social determinants of health. You have all of those different areas that impact health. And when you look at it blown out, weight is just weight is just such a small point in the social determinants of health. And we have the stress and discrimination, social support systems or lack of those, social integration, community engagement. Those are so important for health outcomes overall. And so to me, the idea of just focusing, doctors just focusing on, or other health professionals just focusing on weight is such a losing battle, because it's not something that one can do, right? It's not an action. Weight loss is not something that you can just say that. It's what are we actually doing that we can break down into those practices, those skills, to build those skills to improve health, versus just telling someone lose weight. I mean, it's kind of, it doesn't really help.
Yeah.
It doesn't give them direction or anything. And at the same time, there's so many different ways that people can approach weight loss and have worse health depending on how they're doing it. Absolutely.
Yes. And some people have equilibrium weights that are higher than others. So what would you suggest, like as a dietitian, if someone is concerned about their health and wants like some check-ins on themselves, like things they can do to improve their health that don't focus on weight loss? What would you suggest as a better alternative?
This is my favorite thing to talk about. So I love to go back to the health at every size principles. And there's a lot of people who hear health at every size and think that we're just kind of letting everything go. We're not worried about our health. We're not concerned about it at all. It's kind of where the concern trolling comes into play. But health enhancement, principle wise, is to support health policies that improve and equalize access to information and services, and personal practices that improve human well-being, including attention to individual, economical, social, spiritual, emotional, and other needs. And so that is just, I think, the most positive way that we can help people with their health, because we're not taking health off the picture or out of the picture or anything. Within the principles too, we can also talk about nutrition kind of in a more gentle nutrition way, not having a diet as in, a lot of restriction or anything, but really promoting flexible, individualized eating based on their hunger, their satiety, their nutrient needs. Medical nutrition therapy can fit in here as well if they have any kind of specific medical needs with nutrition, and also pleasure. And we're doing that rather than having this kind of externally regulated plan focused on weight control. So still very much focused on their well-being, their enjoyment, their health. Because it's ridiculous on how we have this kind of like ideal weight, even in your early 20s, this kind of goal or ideal where you feel like you need to be the rest of your life, when our bodies are supposed to change. A 40-year-old body does not look the same. It should not look the same as a 20-year-old body. Like, it's normal, it's healthy to have that kind of change, and to expect us to stay at one ideal weight once we reach adulthood for the rest of our life is ridiculous.
Yeah.
When we can have that more intentional approach and really choose those foods that are going to help them feel good, help nourish them, but take away all of those kind of diet restriction kind of style implementation, then that's really helpful. And Along with the principles too, we talk about life-enhancing movement. So instead of telling them spend an hour on the treadmill or anything like that, what we're doing is really trying to find a way for them to find what is the most joyful kind of movement so that they can do it, have fun with it. They are more likely to stick with it.
I really like the focus you have on sustainability, because as someone who has tried many times to get into fitness, yes, running on the treadmill for an hour is better than taking a half-hour walk. However, running on the treadmill for an hour every day for 1 week and then never again is nowhere near as good. Something that you do for the rest of your life is always going to be better than something you just did for a week.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Same thing with your nutrition intake, with your food intake. If we're having this kind of very restrictive plan, not having any kind of joy in the food, really, how long is that going to last? One of my favorite things to do with people is kind of going through all of these different kind of diets, fad diets, and look at what the similarities are. So if somebody is like feeling better on a specific diet, because sometimes I have people who will comment to me and say, I'm doing this and I've felt better. I have more energy. How can you tell me it doesn't work? And so with those, I really like showing the similarities. So most of the time they're going to promote more nutrient dense food. Yes, they're going to have some that are going to exclude certain types, but they're going to be generally nutrient dense foods. Most of the time they're going to encourage you to make your own foods and eat out less. Most of them are going to encourage you to drink more fluids, to get more water in. Just kind of these basic foundations where if you look at all of them and see what they're similar in, you're like, oh, maybe those foundations are really why you're feeling better. It's not the specific diet itself. And we could have that same kind of feeling without those kind of restrictions. One of my biggest pet peeves is when there are more a wider variety of cultural foods that are just kind of pushed aside, and we focus so much on that like chicken and rice and broccoli kind of thing when there's so much more variety that we can have, so much more flavor and seasoning, and we don't just kind of need to have this kind of whitewashed almost health food.
Welcome to part 2 of this workout tape. We explored the heady history of fat phobia in medicine, but what about today? We must be doing better in 2021 at time of recording. Wow, what a funny joke, Eris. Let's hop back on the mic and get into our next workout, the weight of fat phobia today. Despite having no solid scientific evidence, doctors today still believe that fat people just need to get skinny and that will fix all of the concerning symptoms they're reporting. This has resulted in mistreatment, misdiagnoses, and misdiagnoses that can lead to severe illness and sometimes even death. But don't take my word for it. Let's hear some testimonials from fat people who have actually experienced this.
I was at my gynecologist's office to talk about fertility options. He looked at me, after I had lost 40 pounds, and told me that if I just lost more weight, I'd have no fertility issues. He asked if I exercised, and I told him that I try, but have been struggling with arthritic flare-ups in my knee. He told me that I didn't have arthritis, and that my joints were just tired from all the weight on them. His nurse looked up and corrected him by pointing out that I've had rheumatoid arthritis since I was 16. I switched to a different gynecologist, who told me that my infertility issues were due to premature ovarian failure. Had my old doctor run tests instead of insisting on weight loss, I might have been able to save my eggs years earlier. I started having severe pain and vomiting any time I ate at the age of 12. I went to the doctor and was told that my gallbladder was failing. But because I was young and overweight, I should just use the pain and vomiting as a system to keep me eating healthy foods and to lose weight. When I was 22, I had abdominal pain lasting over a week. I wasn't able to eat, drink, or even go to work because of the pain. I went to my male doctor and explained all of my symptoms, adding in the fact that I had barely eaten anything all week. He looked me in the eye and said, "Well, you're probably just pregnant or need to lose weight, so go home." I asked for a pregnancy test, and it came back invalid because I was so dehydrated I couldn't even pee. 2 days later, I was in the ER, got an ultrasound, and found out that I had gallstones the size of marbles and my gallbladder was about to burst. I tore my ACL in high school, and when I went for an MRI, the first doctor didn't tell me that I'd also torn my meniscus. She told me that she refused to do surgery because it wouldn't do me any good because someone of my size doesn't need their knee fixed, seeing as I couldn't possibly be playing sports or doing any athletic activity. I injured myself while playing soccer and then made it worse while playing volleyball. When I pressed her on the situation, she said, "Well, I wouldn't even consider doing surgery until you lose a lot of weight, but you can't do any strenuous activity on your knee in the shape it's in." I went to a different doctor who did surgery the next month, and he said it was ridiculous to think that my actual knee would put itself back together by me losing weight, and that surgery was my only option to recover later on. My 84-year-old grandmother was in and out of the hospital with terrible stomach pains in the last year of her life. I distinctly remember being in the ER with her one of those times, her flat out on a gurney, hallucinating from the morphine they had given her for the pain. This male doctor walks in, places his hand on her stomach, and says, "This is her problem right here," while jiggling her stomach. She passed away not long after that. The day she died, they discovered she actually had a tumor in her stomach, the size of a cantaloupe.
But Astra, anecdotal evidence isn't science. Those are just testimonials from fat people who could be exaggerating their situation. Well, let me tell you why the science says they're not. A recent study on patient care and doctor bias concluded that physicians who were presented charts of obese patients were less likely to respect the patient, less likely to spend time educating the patient about their health, and express harmful stereotypes like believing obese patients were less likely to adhere to treatment or self-care recommendations and are lazy, undisciplined, and weak-willed. They indicated they would spend 28% less time with an obese patient in their evaluation and would consider the encounter as a waste of time. On top of that, the study found that physicians may over-attribute symptoms and problems to obesity and fail to refer patients with diagnostic testing or consider treatment other than losing weight. And this also extends to medical students who are learning these same behaviors. The study found that when presented with virtual patients with a shortness of breath, obese patients were more likely to receive a lifestyle change recommendation at 54% as opposed to normal weight patients at 13%. The normal weight patients were more likely to receive a prescription to manage symptoms. Let's hop off the bike for our next exercise. And let's move on to our next workout, skinny squats. We're gonna squat to the left and go into a deep squat like you're sitting in the doctor's office being listened to. Now, squat to the right and pick up your prescribed medicine. Make sure you're feeling a strong burn in those thighs. Looks like the doctor also scheduled us for testing. So squat to the left and then lie down. Hover your arms and legs off the ground, focusing in on your core. Gotta fit into that CT scanner, but that won't be a problem because you're skinny. Rock back up into a standing position. And now squat down and repeat these workouts until you get a diagnosis, which should only be 1 or 2 reps because the testing was ordered right away. Great job, everyone. Let's keep it going with fat squats. Now, squat to the right. Go back into that deep squat like you're in a doctor's office. No need to hold this squat for as long as the skinny squat because we're going to be going for 28% less time. The doctor told us to diet and exercise, so let's lunge back to the right and now do 10 jumping jacks. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Symptoms are still there, so we're going to go back to the doctor's office. So let's go back into our right squat and remember to stay here for 28% less time than before. The doctor told us to diet and exercise again, so let's go back into that right squat and now do 9 jumping jacks. Wow, this sure is demoralizing. Continue this exercise with decreasing jumping jacks until you drop dead from an untreated illness that could have been detected by testing during the first rep. This anti-fat bias leads to a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because overweight patients are told time and time again to just lose weight to fix their issues, it leads to an avoidance of care. Why trust doctors when they refuse to listen to you or prescribe the same diet and exercise? Overweight patients often avoid going to the doctor until their conditions have advanced, just to avoid discrimination. And if you don't trust the doctors, you might be more stressed or skeptical during your appointment and not trust the instructions for care, which reaffirms the stereotype of the fat, non-compliant patient. Directly and indirectly, this discrimination can lead to fat patients' illnesses going untreated, often until it's too late. And when fat people feel shamed for their weight by a healthcare provider, it makes them less likely to seek or achieve weight loss. So even if losing weight was the solution, which science does not say it is, fat phobia still makes everything worse. But shaming fat people into losing weight could fix everything, right? That's what the internet seems to think anyway, because they're concerned for fat people's health. Multiple studies say that the psychological stress of fat shaming can cause stress-related health issues. Plus, for certain eating disorders, such as binge eating disorders, it can often lead to worsening symptoms. Let's talk about the science of stress. Humans evolved to release the hormone cortisol to signal that there is a threat we need to get away from, otherwise known as the fight or flight response. You can also add freeze and fawn to that list, but it's not as catchy. So, if you're being chased by a mutant, bloodthirsty turkey, your brain will release cortisol to tell you to run. It will also tell you to eat, because your brain doesn't know how long you'll be under threat of this mutant turkey. Cortisol promotes fat storage, since your body needs fuel when you're running for your life, trying to escape the mutant turkey. Yes, stress eating has a scientific basis, unlike the concept that being overweight is bad for you. Now, the chances of running into a mutant turkey are pretty low for most people. So your body identifies different situations than our ancestors as dangerous and stressful. Having an important project due at work, running late to an event, or being discriminated against are all potential triggers of your fight or flight response and produce cortisol. And what does your body do when you're stressed? Promote eating and store fat. And that is much easier to do when you're not running away from a threat, like the mutant turkey hell-bent on vengeance. We've also evolved to avoid stressful situations because we don't want to seek out the mutant turkey that will eat us. So, if people at the gym say nasty things about you or look down on you, you're less likely to go to the gym to avoid putting yourself in a stressful and demoralizing situation. When stressed about your weight, you're less likely to exercise and more likely to stress eat. These habits cement over long periods of time and become difficult to change. In addition to weight gain, prolonged stress can also increase your likelihood of experiencing anxiety, depression, digestive problems, headaches, muscle tension and pain, heart disease, heart attack, high blood pressure, stroke, sleep problems, and memory and concentration impairment. Some studies have suggested that long-term stress caused by weight discrimination might be more responsible for obesity-correlated illnesses than the weight itself. Congratulations, Internet! You achieved the exact opposite of what your bullying was supposedly intended to do. And you're a douchebag! When we look at scientific studies, including the ones I've cited, we should look out for bias. Scientists are people who live in a society just like us, so they're just as capable of being biased and making mistakes. The science of nutrition and dietary science are fairly new fields that are heavily impacted by beauty standards and corporate lobbying. However, anti-vaxxers, this does not give you an excuse to claim your Facebook groups are more credible than professionals in the field. I don't care how much you trust Cheryl. She's in an MLM and her qualifications include owning a labradoodle. Let's take a look at the evolution of the US government's recommended food servings in pyramid and plate form. There have already been 3 different ones in my lifetime. Remember this one that recommended 6 to 11 servings of bread per day? Good luck with that if you have celiacs. And 2 to 3 servings of dairy even when 65% of the global population is lactose intolerant? I'm happy to follow that one, even though I know the dairy industry had a big influence in setting those numbers. But I don't lie to myself. I know it's unhealthy. And what is this graphic design monstrosity? It has no numbers, and the proportions aren't even sorted from highest to lowest. You can't just take a pie chart and put it in a triangle. The sections are too narrow to glean meaningful information by eye. You would think Eris designed this one with her qualitative data and feelings. At least the current MyPlate is easy to understand. So how does corporate lobbying fit in? You can read in our sources about the dairy and meat industry's involvement in food recommendations. However, the biggest industry influence is the diet industry, focused on getting you slimmer. Well, slimmer in the short term. Because if you succeed in your weight loss and keep the fat off, then you won't be a repeat customer. So there's a financial incentive for these programs to keep you unsuccessful. And a study published in 2015 found that for the vast majority of people, dieting does not work. Individuals typically cannot maintain weight loss through restrictive dieting because deprivation ultimately triggers a biological starvation response in which neurological changes render food especially attention-grabbing, difficult to stop thinking about, and more rewarding to consume. Simultaneously, hormonal changes increase feelings of hunger and reduce one's sense of fullness, and metabolic changes allow the body to sustain itself on fewer calories, resulting in greater fat storage. Moreover, general self-control ability or willpower is reduced.
We know that when people often go on diets, it won't be a long-term kind of thing, right? So we see people losing 10 pounds, gaining 15, losing 20, gaining 25, losing 30, gaining 35. A lot of times people end up dieting their way up. And we know that when you have that fluctuation in weight, that actually puts stress on the body. That can actually increase the risk of cardiovascular disease. And so if we're looking at a group of people at a higher weight who have cardiovascular disease, who have been on many diets and have dieted their way up, there is that question of how much of that is coming from all of that stress being placed on their body over and over again with that up and down weight cycling. And that's not even taking into account any of the social determinants of health. People who I work with often, they have been on diets their entire life, multiple diets. And what do they all have in common? Other than like a few unicorns in the diet industry, that's what they're called. Yeah.
Yes, every once in a while, one person will find like their diet that works for them, but they are a statistical anomaly.
Even at that too, in my experience, what I have seen with people in that might be 5 to 10 years.
If any diet ever worked, the entire industry would collapse.
Yes. Yeah. So that
logically, that's 300 years of diets that have not worked.
I think the most recent numbers is that it's a $59 billion industry.
I'm not going to victim blame anyone who has been told by a doctor, however you lose the weight, it doesn't matter, it needs to come off, because they are trying to follow their doctor's instructions.
If it does work, it's short term.
Yep.
And there's a lot of continued restriction down the line. The dieting itself, that becomes the issue. Your hunger hormones go up. You can have less energy. You're moving around less as well. Your metabolism starts to slow. And you have that binge restrict cycle. One of my favorite analogies is if you think about a diet as if you were underwater trying to breathe through a straw. You're essentially getting diet air. That moment when you get out of the water and you're just kind of taking these deep breaths is kind of similar to somebody who is just getting off a diet and just wanting to eat whatever they can. That in the moment feels scary and it feels very out of control when it's really just your body doing what your body needs to do, getting in more of that nourishment. And so they'll go back underwater to get that diet air again, or go back on that diet.
The more you diet, the less you are able to control. It's not really a practice makes perfect situation. It's the opposite. It's a deprive yourself of a necessary ingredient to a healthy brain, and your brain will stop working right.
If science says dieting doesn't work, and science has evidence that weight isn't an indicator of health, then why does the diet industry exist? It sprung up long before science started investigating the relationship between weight and health. We've already covered that in part 1 with our favorite diet briefs. Diets, as the advertisements promise, are about looking thin and beautiful. That's what the before and after photos emphasize through clever lighting tricks and Photoshop. And the short-term weight loss convinces you that the laxative diet teas are working. Then your body freaks out and thinks it's the second coming of the potato famine, or your ancestry's choice of food scarcity, and the weight comes back in your body's attempt to save your life. But somehow, it's your fault it doesn't work, not theirs. Their product isn't bogus. You lack dedication and willpower. So you feel like a failure and come back for more, or a different fad diet sold to you by Photoshop moms. And, as we discussed earlier with Kat, weight cycling is really terrible for your body. Losing weight on a diet only to regain it back is worse for your body than not dieting at all. And, with very few unicorn exceptions, this is what is going to happen every time you diet. This next exercise is called the fitness model. You'll need an off-screen friend to help you with this one.
Angle, give me a semi-profile.
Okay?
Suck in your tummy.
Got it?
Roll your shoulders back.
You got it?
Put a hand on your hip.
Hands on hip.
Grab that skinny arm.
Skinny arm.
Pop that leg forward. Yep, suck in more.
Yep, got it? Is this enough?
Keep sucking.
Okay.
Suck in more.
This is the most effective workout in terms of aesthetics. Am I sucking in enough?
No, but we'll fix it in Photoshop.
Now let's talk about the obesity epidemic. Obesity was categorized as a disease by the American Medical Association in 2013. A disease, by definition, is your body's functions going wrong, which is why we see diseases as bad. But your body is designed to store fat due to an evolutionary response to food-scarce environments, which has been the norm for most of the world for a lot of human history. According to the expert panel for the AMA, obesity should not be classified as a disease because it does not fit the definition. But the AMA voted to classify obesity as a disease anyway. It's like how they changed the definition of planet to exclude dwarf planets, which makes no linguistic sense and was a cover-up to single out Pluto. Hold on. It looks like Eris went off on one of the Pluto rants again. What could possibly have motivated the doctors at the AMA to go against the science and their own expert panel to label obesity as a disease? Maybe the unconscious bias I've been going over. Or maybe the sweet, sweet call of cash money. Completely unrelated, Medicare is America's largest insurance provider in our for-profit medical healthscape of a system. It reimburses office visits based on the number of bodily systems reviewed and the number of diseases counseled for. So, if an overweight person comes in for an annual exam at peak health, the medical provider can make more money by bringing up their weight, as they are at risk of contracting the horrible disease of obesity. Plus, if obesity is a disease, federal grants will fund more research and insurance companies will reimburse more treatments. Research on obesity is often funded by pharmaceutical companies, medical device manufacturers, bariatric surgery practices, and weight loss programs, who all want to sell cures for this disease. which may incentivize researchers to come to the conclusion these companies want, to continue to receive funding, even if it involves some of those confirmation bias stretches we did earlier. We're living the capitalist dream. I can't wait for the wealth to finally trickle down to me. Weight is not the same as fitness. A year and a half ago, I couldn't run for more than a minute straight. And a week before filming this video, I ran a half marathon. Here's a bunch of photos of me doing handstands on top of literal mountains I have climbed in the past couple of years. I am the fittest I have ever been in my life. I also eat way healthier than I used to, even accounting for all the cheese. I'm also 20 pounds heavier than I was at my thinnest. And because I have a lifetime of internalized fat phobia and white supremacist beauty standards, that seems unfair. Not illogical, but unfair. Because I was taught that by eating healthy and exercising, I would get to be thin and pretty. Because losing weight isn't about health. It's about being desired and admired for assumed moral, intellectual, spiritual, and genetic superiority.
Diets in general, they are rooted in wanting to have that acceptance in society. They're rooted in admiration, respect in a fat-phobic society. Again, not blaming the victim. It's completely understandable for people to want to go on diets over and over again. While there is that acceptance, there is thin privilege, 100%. And this is really where people in the industry have, I think, a big ethical role in breaking down that fat-phobic part of society.
Now that we've worked out our subconscious fat-phobic bias to the conscious level, it's time for a cool down. So, what are better measures of your health than weight? Blood pressure, heart rate recovery, and resting heart rate. Cholesterol and inflammation are also very important, but they're really hard to test at home. Most fitness trackers will grab your resting heart rate and heart rate recovery for you. You'll want to shoot for 60 to 100 beats per minute as a benchmark for your resting heart rate. Heart rate recovery is how fast your spiked heart rate drops back down to your resting rate after an intense workout. So you'll want to check this during your cool down on your fitness tracker if you have one. The healthy range to shoot for is 22 to 52 beats per minute lost per minute after an intense workout, but really anything above 12 beats per minute is pretty good and will keep you out of the high risk zone. You can also just check your heart rate for free at your wrist or on your neck, but I'm comically bad at finding my pulse, so I use a fitness tracker.
Blood pressure cuffs are about the same price as a scale, and significantly less demoralizing to use. I found this one for under $20 online. The top number is the systolic pressure, which should be under 120. The lower one is diastolic pressure, which should be under 80, according to the American Heart Association. And make sure to measure at least 30 minutes after exercising or consuming caffeine. And I'm not a doctor. I'm a fitness instructor. But it sure seems like a better option than a scale that tells me I'm not good enough. Take deep, calming breaths and start.
Please remain seated and refrain from talking during measurement, and keep cuff at the heart level. Your blood pressure is systolic 121 millimeter of mercury, diastolic 81 millimeter of mercury. Your pulse was 69. Your blood pressure is normal.
Why is it important to critique doctors and scientists like this? Especially during the age of misinformation and anti-vax conspiracy theories. Aren't I perpetuating mistrust in scientists by doing this? No, Dad, I'm not. All of my references are from scientific studies published in reputable journals and experts in their field. The point of science is to critique, peer review, and change our minds based on new and verifiable information. Science is a process, not a set of truths. And if people claiming to represent science become dogmatic and unchanging, they aren't worth defending. That's ideology or religion, and I don't want to be a member of the Church of Racist Skull Guy. We live in a society which holds problematic views which are instilled in people, including scientists. We can combat this by encouraging more diversity in science. We all have blind spots, so we need people who can recognize those blind spots and show us what we're missing. Fat people have been an acceptable target for hundreds of years because of Christian white supremacist views our society holds, and that has impacted the science produced by our society.
We clearly need more than just white Christian men becoming scientists. And there's no shame in admitting we have blind spots. I don't feel shame for admitting I can't see directly behind me, where a mutant bloodthirsty turkey is waiting to pounce. Oh no! Ah!
Thank you so much for joining us here on Bad Astra. Please let us know what you think down in the comments, and remember to sweetly caress that like button. If you want production updates and early and uncensored access to our videos before we post them on YouTube, please join our Patreon. We post behind-the-scenes production updates, outtakes, and even take suggestions for video topics. Make sure you're subscribed and click the bell icon for new notifications for every video. We're also active on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and Twitter, and links to all of our socials are in the description. Thank you so much for supporting our channel, especially all of our lovely patrons. We'll see you in the next video. Astra out!
Bad Astra, to the stars, to the stars.